If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the creepiest thing you've encountered while in the woods? Crater Lake, Oregon. Camped in the backcountry, at a popular spot for deer to congregate. We didn't mean to, but realized once we were set up and was dark. Sets of eyes surrounded us for hours, just staring. These were deer, so we weren't spooked, though it was still a bit unsettling. We were on edge and had our eyes scanning the campsite in all directions. Around midnight I see a set of eyes low to the ground, yet not too low. They approached us in a perfectly fluid motion. Almost no bobbing of the head. I went into cougar defense mode. Speaking loudly and confidently, with my axe raised above my head, never turning my back, standing my ground. I continued this until the eyes stopped in their tracks. Eventually retreating a few yards back behind a tree, watching us. I kept talking to them, asking them to leave. After 5 minutes or so, they retreated from where they came. I've never been so scared in my life. We did not sleep that night. I believe it was a cougar, possibly coming to hunt the deer. We read later that there had been reports of a cougar at that location that was hard to scare away. Crater Lake is spooky at night. My cat used to bring in things for me, mostly dead but sometimes still living. He brought me a small wild rabbit that wasn't dead, so I got it from him and made a bandage for it. I kept it for about a week before it was hopping around normally again, and my dad said it was probably good to go back out. I took it out to one of the creeks near my house and put it beside a tree under some vines. I took maybe 5 steps before I heard it scream, and when I turned around something had ripped it in half. I didn't see what it was and I didn't hear anything running around. I'm sure it was a fox or something, but it still freaks me out to think about it. I was walking with my cousins about 14 years ago when we found what looked like an old burned out house. So naturally, being kids at the time and having no sense of self-preservation, we decided to explore it. Mostly it was just full of charred wooden crap and junk, but then one of my cousins found an entrance to a cellar outside. We busted the old rusted lock off the door and looked down inside. It was dark down there and we didn't really have any reason to go poking around it, plus we were starting to get creeped out, so we kicked some dirt down into it and walked off. When we get about 15 yards away from the house, one cousin says he hears a noise, so we stop. And yep, there was noise like somebody coming up the rotting cellar stairs of the house. We peek back through the trees and see a dark kind of fuzzy shape crawl out of the cellar, which we left open. It looked kind of like a big old dog. And then it stood upright. We hauled ducking ass out of there. We all ran off in different directions like morons, each of us convinced whatever the cellar thing was chasing us. I ran right through some briars in a panic and tore my arms and legs all up, which got me in trouble when I got home. We were all fine otherwise, but we did avoid going that far back into the woods after that for a long time. Closest thing I can figure is there was a small black bear living in the cellar. Maybe it had another entrance we didn't know about and we woke it up being little assholes. But seeing something hairy and dark come out of that cellar then stand up was like being in a horror movie. I never want to see that old house again. When I was 13, I went into a forest with my 2 friends. We followed a path that was shaped like an Y, and then I saw some dark figure or animal on the left path jumping sideways to its right and hide under a tree and then run at us. We just ran as fast as we could and never returned to that forest. When I was about 7, my friends and I went exploring in the woods behind my house. We saw up ahead a whitish, roundish object partially buried in leaves, and so my best friend and I, being the oldest, exhibited bravery and went to investigate. We got close enough to see that it was a human head with a butcher knife stuck through it. The whole gaggle of us girls fled the woods, screaming. We told one girl's older brother, who went back and said it was a mannequin head. He took out the butcher knife, washed it, and gave it to his mother for Mother's Day. I was walking in the woods by my house and there was a dead deer carcass that was decomposing and its rib cage was exposed and there was a cat sleeping inside it. If I fits, I sits. Duck me, cats really will sleep anywhere. I used to play airsoft in the woods on my family's property when I was younger. One day I was out playing with friends and I kind of dug myself a little nest for cover, cleared away the plants and pushed the dirt to make a small berm. A week or 2 later I was in that area of the woods again and decided to go see if my spot was there. It was there, but there was also a dead coyote just lying in it. The coyote was unmarked/uninjured, so I think it was just looking for a place to die alone and found that little spot. This was while camping in the middle of nowhere in southern Utah, and by the middle of nowhere, I mean a several-hour drive to the nearest gas station. It was me and several college friends that decided to go camping there for that sort of solitude. A couple hours after dark my buddy starts getting all weird, saying that there are people moving around outside of our campsite. We figure it's just him being paranoid, PTSD as a bitch, and a bit drunk. After about a half hour of him swearing that he hears people moving around, he jumps up, opens the door to his car and grabs his pistol. Before any of us can say or do anything, he fires several rounds into the desert just outside of camp. Suddenly I hear two guys start swearing and take off running like hell from roughly the direction he had shot in. They run maybe 100 yards away and hop into a car we didn't know was there and drive off. To this day I have no idea what they would have done had he not done anything. I walked up this huge hill/woodland about 25 minutes from my house. I followed my dog and we ended up a little off the path, but eventually at the top. I used to walk up it a lot as a kid and I remember it opening up to endless moorland, but it was so foggy I could barely see hands in front of my face. I sat down to catch my breath and my dog was sniffing about. She suddenly stops and points and starts to growl. I can still not see or hear anything. She starts to back towards me and bark, so I shout out wondering if anyone is around. No answer. By now the dog is going insane, barking/yelping/snarling like I've never seen. So I quickly put her on the lead and run the hell away. My dad's friend told me a story about this swampy area about a 15/20ths of a minute walk away. It's a country road with an abandoned barn on the right, swamp both sides, and a popular place unfortunately for people illegally dumping stuff. One summer there was an older car parked off the side, and when it was there after 2 days my dad's friend decided to see if it was stolen or something. Everything looked neat inside, there was a wallet open on the seat. He walked a few meters into the bush when the smell hit him. His head was down because he was kinda preparing himself for something unpleasant. He didn't have to see or explore, he just knew it was a body. He drove home and called the police, then waited for them at the area. An older man had indeed hung himself and due to the summer heat/animals etc. began to look like a melted candle. Every time I visit my folks I kinda look down that road. It's very creepy, stereotype of a monster movie scene, but the city recently paved a recreational hiking trail through, because it's part of a protected area. Maybe I'll go this summer and check it out. I'm really into hiking, and had some free time before dinner so I decided to go. I wasn't exactly on a mountaineering mission, it was only for like an hour and no off-trail nonsense. Either way, I had forgotten my flashlight, so I had to walk back in the dark. My imagination was messing with me a bit, and I thought I heard a scream in the distance. I realized a few minutes later after hearing a few more screams that it was just a mountain lion, and it was far enough away where I wouldn't have to worry about it. Things like that keep you on your toes though. I have a small woodland on my property. It's private land and no public footpath runs near it. Once, when I was about 12 to 13, I was cycling around when out of the corner of my eye I see a person crouched in the bushes. I stopped out of shock. This guy was big with a coarse, dark beard, bulging eyes and looked super scraggly. I don't know if he was homeless but I assume he was poaching. We both made awkward eye contact for the split second I stopped, then I cycled on. I got back to the house as fast as I could, but by the time my mom and I returned in the car, he was gone. Never seen him again. I'll never get the image of that man crouching out of my head. A few weeks before this happened I was telling my partner that Bigfoot is absolutely not real, no way can you change my mind. So we go to this farm in an isolated area in the forest to work for a few weeks and the house on the property is small so we have to camp. We have a Honda Element and the back seats are removable so we had replaced them with a full-sized mattress. It was comfortable but still a little squishy with two of us in there, so one warm night, the fourth night we were camping on this property, I decide to sleep outside of the car with my dog. I have a small tent and my sleeping bag, but the night was so nice that I was laying with the upper half of my body outside of the door of tent. I think it was around 4 a.m., I woke up for no reason really and for a few minutes I watched the stars. I had just seen a shooting star when suddenly I hear what sounds like a large something walking just a few feet away from me on my left, which there was a thin wooded area. What was weird about it was I didn't hear it walk up, it was just suddenly there. And it had heavy, loud footsteps. I definitely should have heard it walking up to me before it was this close. How long had it been sitting there? Just a few feet away. It sounded large like a bear, but it sounded more like 2 legs, not 4, and there was no heavy breathing and smelling sounds like bears make. So it walks by me and I'm frozen in fear. I could not bring myself to move a muscle and just kept staring at the sky. It walked past me and once I could hear that I finally got the courage to look. What I see terrified me to the bone and sent me into straight panic attack mode. I see the silhouette through the darkness of this very tall person. Or bear, standing on 2 legs. The legs looked thick, almost furry. Then I saw it take a step. Which confirmed what I was looking at was a pair of legs. I grabbed my little dog, jumped up, ripped open the back hatch of the car, and Superman dove into the back. I pulled the hatch shut and looked at my partner who was in the car, wide awake wondering what the duck is going on out there. I say, "Did you see that?" And he says, "No. But I heard it." And he also said it didn't sound like a bear, but sounded large. So I freak out for a while and 7 a.m. eventually rolls around. We get out of the car and surely there is a path of broken sticks and stomped on weeds where we heard the creature walking. My sleeping bag had been left outside, literally vertically scrunched on the ground because I jumped straight up and out of it. Ha ha. I now believe Bigfoot might exist, because I have no idea what else that thing could have possibly been. A friend and I packed up my truck and drove from Ontario to Alberta for work. It was a 3-day drive and in early October. The first night we stayed in a campground in northern Ontario, but the second night we just pulled off into a tourist overlook and set up a tent in a free camping area. The site was down a steep winding road that was hard to navigate in the dark with big potholes. We got the bottom and there was a few grassy spots and a public washroom on the water's edge. It was already late and neither of us had phone service, so we set the tent up, made a sandwich and crawled into our sleeping bags. It was a cold night but bearable, and just as I warm up and about to fall all asleep I hear a car slowly coming down the road but see no headlights. I shake my buddy awake and stand up in the tent to look out the mesh window but can't see anything cause it's so dark. The car is getting closer and rumbling like an old 80s Impala or something. I hear the brake squeak as it comes to a stop, and now sitting there in silence we hear a door creak open and then 2 doors shut. Duck him, thinking what is going to happen to us. Clearly they're locals or something because they had no headlights on coming down the road. We hear multiple footsteps out and around but not close enough to us to really cause worry, then dead silence. What felt like hours passed and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears when we heard one car door shut and the engine start up to the car. Lights quickly flicked on and off as he passed reverse and put the car in drive and slowly started up the road to leave, and again with no headlights on. Once we heard the car accelerate on the highway, my buddy and I flicked on our flashlights and I opened the tent door, shining both of our lights all over the open area and forest edge to see nothing. He kept watch as I tore the camp down, actually just pulled the poles out of the tent and threw it in the back seat of the Ranger and got the hell out of there as quick as possible. We drove about 2 hours and pulled over at a well-lit service area that was just a building with bathrooms and pay showers, and slept a few restless hours till the sun came up and carried on with the last day of travel. Went camping a few months back and the husband, our 2 medium-sized dogs, and I went to sleep in the tent. We hear the normal bug noises, owls, and raccoons. Then all of a sudden one of our dogs perks up and we hear this ungodly growl/demonic roar. It didn't sound like a bear or a mountain lion, or even a pissed off raccoon. To this day we have no idea what it was. The one dog, with a manly bark despite being a girl, starts barking her head off and husband and I freeze. It continues to growl. We only have a knife and neither of us know what to do. We want to know what the hell it was, but also don't want to call attention to ourselves. Should we let the dog keep barking to scare it off? Or stop her so it's not curious? Can it tear up our tent? Eventually it leaves. We didn't hear footsteps, it just stopped. I have never been so scared. The next morning a plastic container we had used for the dog's water was clawed up by something larger than a raccoon. Still freaks me out. Was pissed off after a fight with my parents when I was 16 or 17. Ended up driving around and offloading in my Jeep Cherokee with a friend while venting and bullshitting. Went down some logging road and then found a trail across a ditch and a field off to the left. Well, it was already getting dark, and as we got further and further in, it got darker and darker. The trail eventually opened up a little and we rolled up to a dilapidated shack missing its front face but with half a roof and 3 remaining walls. The shack itself was creepy in the dark, but the scary part was there was a brand new shiny chrome chair with red cushions and various chains, ropes and tools around. Me and my friend kind of looked at each other and silently agreed to GTFO. Well, I get halfway through my 3-point turn and my tire drops into a hole or rut and stops me dead. Huge oh duck, we're in a wrong turn movie feeling for both of us, and neither of us was going to get out of the Jeep in the dark near this murder shack, so I start rocking it back and forth and spinning tires until I chewed my way out. Then rock it back out down the quad trail at highway speeds. I cannot describe the overwhelming feeling of imminent danger we both had, but was glad to be burning rubber out of there. Anyways, that's not it for creepy. Spent the night with my buddy, neither sleeping much, discussing what we had seen. We made a plan to bring some items for personal defense and go check it out during the day. We knew which logging road we had gone down and approximately where the trail started, but we couldn't for the life of us find it during the day. We think we found it again at night a while later, but if that's how that shit works, we definitely weren't going to push our luck and venture into that Twilight Zone shit again. Lamau. Although the creepy factor isn't super high, I'm not sure a better opportunity will arise to tell this story. I was walking through the woods when I was probably around 7 with my 8-year-old brother and his friend. We found an old, rusty, abandoned car. It was kinda weird. Naturally, we decided it was an enemy car and we had to throw rocks at it and smash every window. What we failed to recognize was that we were really about 100 feet from the end of the woods, where there was a man in a house, who owned this car. He questioned us, myself and my brother's friend quipped back no. When asked if we did the damage. My brother, on the other hand, shameful, said yes sir. Busted. Went to a wilderness camp in between freshman and sophomore year of high school. We went on a 2-day hike in the Poconos. It was my first time hardcore backpacking, so my group was pretty slow and we ended up taking a shortcut. When we finally met up with the rest of the group, we thought we were going to go with them to the campsite. Turns out, since we took a 2-mile shortcut, we had to go back and do the extra 2 miles. Long story short, it was a lot more than 2 miles and the head counselor took us off the trail and deep into the forest late at night. At one point we were walking and he said, "Quick. Everyone turn your lights off." We look to our right and 15 feet from us is a huge black bear, all we see is its lumbering shoulders and glowing green eyes staring at us through the underbrush. Then we just kept on walking. Since I live in a small town, and there isn't much of duck all to do unless you're a junkie or a drunk, a lot of us would go driving around in the desert. One night, midsummer, my cousin, myself, and a couple buddies were coming back into town when out of the blue my cousin's truck dies. We're trying to get the damn thing going but it won't fire, so we end up pushing it. Made it almost 100 yards when out of nowhere we hear something in the brush closing in fast. In a panic, my cousin dumps the clutch and the truck finally started as we all piled in the cabin bed. As we hightail it out of there, some kinda bear/wolf beast of a thing comes out from the brush line and starts chasing the truck, but thankfully we lost it after a short bit. Next one, I was walking on a service road and dove into the brush to relieve myself. About 20 yards into the thicket, I happened on an old, and I mean decades old, very small grave. Little cross and all. I've convinced myself it was someone's pet, but in the back of my head I have always thought otherwise. Whenever I was 12 I would walk in the woods. I didn't really know my way so it was simply straight back into the woods and out whenever I got bored. One day I went at least half a mile in and saw what looked like a backyard area in the woods this one day. I noticed a structure, it was like a shed of some sort but had a blue tarp roof and had sticks supporting the roof. I heard voices but saw no one and I curious as there was still woods for what looked like miles. I started walking. I kept walking and walking towards it but I didn't seem to be getting any closer at all. I'd take 30 big steps towards it and still look like I hadn't gotten any closer. Weird AF, so I just walked straight out of the woods. Maybe the universe was giving me a sign that this structure was dangerous and not to go towards it, but I no longer went in the woods after that. I'm a bit of a paranormal believer, so if you're a skeptic just bear with me here for a second. I have a condition that makes it so that I can't see shit in darkness. Like it surprises most people when I tell them I can't see in what's apparently just low medium dark areas. So, I was out with a friend once when it was fully dark. We have to walk on a small path right next to a forest to really get out of town. One day we're walking past it and my friend does like a double take, which I of course notice. So I just instinctively look as well even though I can't see more than a meter ahead of me. But when I look I see this white female figure just standing facing us about 15 to 20 meters from us. We both stop and he goes, "Wait, you see her too?" As he knows I'm basically blind at night. We both decided to just GTFO of there after that. But I swear, it just doesn't make any sense. It bothers me so much when I think of it. The figure wasn't glowing or giving off any kind of light like a classic movie ghost, it was just a woman with super pale skin and black hair. I shouldn't have been able to see this no matter how goddamn white it was. But I was. And it was clear as day. She wasn't moving at all and she made no sound. She just stood there facing us. In college, a friend and I went up to the local lake, 2 20-year-old girls. It's like midnight or so, and we're talking for what seems like an eternity. This was a common place for us to go and have heart-to-hearts. We're probably half a mile or so from our car on the edge of the lake where there's a bunch of rocks. You aren't supposed to be up there after dark, and no one ever pays for parking either. We see a pickup truck come up and park in the same general area as our car. At least 2 people get out of the car with flashlights and are looking all over the place. They started coming over towards where we were. Since we would have to pass the general direction of them to get by, we called out, "Who's there?" As soon as we say something both people kill their flashlights. We freak the heck out and start running as much as we can towards our car in the dark. At that point I'm on the phone leaving an absurd voicemail to my boyfriend, telling him everything about where we are and what's going on. We heard footsteps as we were running to the car, but never saw who it was or what they were doing. And that was the last time we ever went up there after dark. My older cousins had a clubhouse built at my grandparents' place about 45 minutes outside of Winnipeg. Middle of nowhere town. Heavily wooded. Clubhouse was built about 50 or 60 yards into the bush from their driveway. They neglected it rather quickly and it grew in. Every once in a while I'd venture in to check it out. Was in there once as dusk was approaching, but it was still rather light out. Hear something in the bush. Whip my head and see something maybe the size of a small dog dashing through the bushes. Only it was very fast. Couldn't make it what it was. I kinda stopped and it started circling me, also very quickly. I froze, hoping it was one of my grandpa's 2 dogs despite knowing that whatever this was too small to be one of the dogs. Something must have spooked it because it suddenly dashed super fast further into the woods as I booked it out of there. Of course as soon as I got out I see both the dogs laying down sleeping in front of the house. Still have no clue what I saw that day. Wasn't too far into the bush at all, but there was an area on the west side of my res near the beach where it felt like you were being watched. I tried to pick berries there once or thrice as a kid and would always end up bolting after trying to ignore the super creepy feeling of being watched. It was seriously so uncomfortable. Turns out my sister felt the same way. And my mom. She told me a story of when she was younger and went picking berries there with her cousins. She finally mentioned, "Does it feel like you're being watched?" And then suddenly everyone was running out of there. I think they even left their berry buckets behind. It's a creepy feeling, but she finds it amusing now how everyone just bolted on her. My sister noticed a hole in the ground, and associated the feeling with it. I wonder if they had some kind of ceremony there and now a spirit lingers? I tried finding it last year or so with my fiancé, but crazily enough a house had been frickin' built over it. And apparently it's a spooked house. One of the guys who went into it was sitting on an armchair with his head angled towards the floor, when he felt someone slap him on the mouth. He looked up and nobody was there. So, I'd still like to find this spot to see if I can experience that feeling again, now that I know a house is built over it and it isn't where I thought it was when I tried to go finding it as an adult. Well, I wasn't in the woods, but I lived next to them. Coyotes. There's a pack, there's at least 3 of them. It's hard to describe. If you've never been out at night and suddenly heard coyotes howling and yowling and yipping, it just gives you this really visceral feeling of nope, get out of there. My dogs don't react to the coyotes at all, and I've heard them so many times that they're familiar, but they still spook me so hardcore whenever I hear them when I'm outside. Also I know they can get up here. The apartment I live in is basically up a hill, but there's 2 sloped pathways that go from the ravine to the hill where the apartments are, and I've seen one coyote twice, or 2 different coyotes, down in the ravine. That wasn't spooky, the poor thing seemed cold and possibly injured, and it just settled down for a nap. Now for super creepy, one week when I'd been hearing coyotes a lot at night, I'm out with the dogs, and one of the bushes starts rustling. That my dogs reacted to. They went on alert, and then just turned around and hightailed it back to the front door. Now I said they don't react to coyote noises, and the younger one will go after basically any small animal she sees, birds, squirrels, cat, a rat we saw one time. Any rustling noise usually evokes an attack response from her. So for her to just turn and basically run back inside, really duckin' spooky. When you camp at Ohio Gulch on the south of Maui, you gotta walk up the trail to the top of the falls. Just don't wander off the trail into the bamboo forest. It's green in there, really green, and dark, and wet. You can't see the sun overhead or the tangled bamboo roots covering the forest floor. There are 3 or 4 paths in the forest, and none of them lead out. All the trails lead to a small clearing with an old tumble-down shack in the middle. A floor, the remains of 4 walls. It's unearthly quiet. You can't hear the Ohio stream or waterfalls or any birds, just the sound of your own labored breathing. Who the duck built a shack/home in the middle of this green hell? Legends say a hippie burnout back in the 60s lived here till he died, probably of loneliness and despair. How did he carry flooring, walls, and a tin roof through a mile of nearly impenetrable jungle 40 miles from the nearest town? Who knows? Around this shack, there's nothing. No cigarette butts, no beer cans, nothing, only regret and desperation. You try to retrace your steps back to the way you came to this forsaken spot, but the wet ground has already hidden your track. You're lost, and thirsty and hungry because it was only a 20-minute hike to the top of the falls, right? When it's getting dark you manage to stumble out of the charming bamboo grove into daylight and head downhill because downhill means you're going toward the ocean on any island, right? You find your tent at Ohio Campground and cry yourself to sleep. My mom used to take me to one of the towns she grew up in as a kid. She would drive me around and show me weird places. I never saw anything crazy. But just a list of things that happened in the woods around her neighborhood. My grandmother was over a friend's house for a little party. Some guy came into the house that they didn't know. My grandmother asked who he was and her friend said that he needs to get out of the house. That was the man that lived in the woods behind her yard. They later found him standing in her friend's little daughter's room. A little girl fell and died in a well that was used for Boy Scout stuff. An abandoned psych ward. When it used to be active, some of the patients would escape and hide in the woods. My grandmother had a friend who was kidnapped to the woods for a cult sacrifice. He was found alive and apparently the cult leader was the son of a cop. I went for a kind of hiking trip once, but we were renting a room in a nearby farm to sleep at night, then during the day we'd drive to places and hike the hills and mountains around there. As you can imagine, it's several hours away from the cities, etc. There was only a small town there. The people seemed fine though. One day while in the town after our hiking, we were looking for a good place to see the sunset, and one of the employees in a shop there heard us talking amongst each other, and told us he knows somewhere. Now this place had quite a lot of travelers and hikers, so on the mountains and other climbs, you would see many other people walking there, so it wasn't scary, it was just a nice hiking place. But the place this guy sent us to was like far away from all the popular spots and there wasn't anyone there except us. Now we decided to believe the local and got out of the car to walk into this forest path that looked really messy and like no one's been in there for years. But there was a rough outline of a path in the grass that we could kind of follow. There were a few signs at the entrance like beware of wolves, bats, snakes, poison or whatever, and I had a really bad feeling about it, but everyone really wanted to see the sunset, so we followed the path. Not a single soul around except us, but we could hear rustling in the tall grass around us, probably the wolves or foxes. Walking further down the path, which was way longer than we expected, there was a snake and various poisonous spiders hanging on the trees. Honestly, at the snake right in front of us, I told everyone we better go back and they were just like so casual about it and wanted to keep going. There was a really foul smell, but we could see we were reaching the end of the path, and eventually we went out to what seemed like just a dry lake. There were sand flies and they were attacking us and actually biting us relentlessly, but it was actually a somewhat nice place to see the sunset. The lake was practically dry as we were standing in the lake, but there was no water until about 100-200 meters away. Some of us wanted to walk until the water and I was kind of going along with it, until we walked a few meters and could see fresh footprints in the sand in front of us, and I was just like, nope, there's some other idiots who've walked this path to reach this desert place, and as far as we could see there was no one in front of us, and there was only footsteps going forwards and none coming back, so whoever it was, he was still there. We had to wait about 30 minutes more until the sunset and I told them, just take a picture and let's get out of this place, I'm not waiting any longer. And also the sand flies were like trying to kill us, so they agreed and we got out of there as soon as possible. Everyone knew something was wrong with the place but didn't want to show sign of fear in front of each other, because for the entire about 15-minute walk, everyone was dead silent. I did take a few pictures of the path and the lake if anyone interested. Yeah, it was in Australia. Rest of the trip was fine, never followed any locals' advices, lol. When I was a kid, maybe 11 or 12, me and my family went camping with another group of friends near a place called Saunders, in Alberta, Canada. We would always go as far into the backcountry as we could, and further if our vehicles would make it. I remember this one time we had camped in a massive clearing, deep in the bush. At the opposite side from where we had entered there was a trail leading into the woods, maybe just wide enough for a small truck to fit through, but anyways, as I remember it, about 5 minutes walk down this trail we had stumbled upon a small gated piece of land, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. It was a short metal property fence, only about 3 feet high but highly decorative, old and faded from the elements. In this fence were graves, but they were small. Like really small. Probably 5 foot by 3 foot. There were a few headstones with old illegible writing, and a few wooden crosses, each with a respective grave that had a line of rocks around the perimeter. Our parents didn't seem to think it was a huge deal, but it is probably the creepiest thing I've ever encountered. My parents seemed to think the land may have been pioneered at some point, and may just be from an unlucky family. The area did have a few old buildings around. I remember a dilapidated shack and a really old hunting shack tucked deep in the woods when we went for ATV rides. The internet doesn't seem to know anything at all either about the grave site, so I'm sure it's likely the story has been lost to time. We also found a really small rocking chair across the trail from the site, a little ways into the tree line. It seemed to be old, but definitely not over 50 years. We were camping, in an isolated area connected to the main camp through a very steep path. Even cars had difficulty going up. I was alone in my tent, when something wakes me up in the middle of the night. I see bright lights outside the walls of my tent. I stick my heads out and see these 3 bright lights that goes around in circles. They looked like flashlights but I couldn't see anyone behind them. I called toward the main camp. I saw these 3 very tall shadows and they just went up, and a few sthe others and they saw that too. We screamed at the lights and asked who's there? But no one answered. Since I'm a 5 feet 4 inches girl with balls of steel, I got annoyed and started running towards them. They turned around, went up the path, and started running Ekans. I went behind them and even going as fast as I could. I couldn't go up the steep path as fast as they could. I arrived at the main camp and found no one. That was creepy AF. I lived and worked in Germany for 4 years when I was in my late 20s/early 30s. There are lots of forests in Germany with great paths and people walk/bike/jog through them all the time. I went walking through the forest near my work one evening, a shortcut to get to the S-Bahn tram station to go home, but it was starting to get dark and I got the strongest feeling that I should turn back and walk the long way to the station on town sidewalks. But I ignored the feeling and kept walking through the woods. A bit later, a guy on a bike swooshed by very close to my left without ringing his bell or saying anything, which I think must be illegal in Germany. Scared the crap out of me, and I started walking faster. About 10 minutes later, I got to about halfway down the path to the station, where there was a park bench for people to sit and rest or enjoy nature or whatever, and the guy is sitting, now naked, on the park bench, whacking his weenie and watching me walk up. I gave him the dirtiest look I could muster, didn't say a word, and ran the rest of the way to the station. I never took the shortcut through the woods to the station again. I used to live with my dad on 160 acres of nothing but woods. No one around for miles except for the occasional person headed to their hunting camp. There was a creek at the back of the property that I would ride my four-wheeler to so I could fish and smoke cigarettes without my dad knowing. There were all sorts of animals around. I always had a pistol and knives on me, mostly because there are huge hogs and we had spotted a panther/mountain lion, whatever you want to call it. Only saw it around dusk a handful of times, so I always had protection. I remember going fishing one of these times. Like usual, I sat on the bank, fished and smoked, but about 20 minutes and everything got quiet, like dead quiet, which wasn't normal. There was always birds and bugs making some kind of noise. It sent a chill up my spine. I felt as though I was being watched, but I couldn't see anything or anyone around, which really bugged me out, made me on edge. So I packed my things up and left, but on my way out I could have swore I saw something standing off to the side of a tree, and it wasn't small at all. I proceeded to lay on the throttle and GTFO of there. Fast forward a few weeks later, Dad and I are headed into town, driving down the dirt road which led to the main road. We are about half a mile from the house when we pass a clearing off to my right where a fence split two properties. At the end of the fence there was a gate about 5 feet tall. When we passed it, I caught something out the corner of my eye. It was huge, black, and stood well over the fence and gate. Before I could say anything, my dad looked at me and calmly asked, "Did you see that?" I replied, to which he followed up with, "Don't talk about it," and we never said a word about it since, and that's been about 5 years ago. Pretty sure I had other creepy shit happen, but for some reason these two events really stuck with me. Coming back from Alberta the following November, my wife flew out to drive back with me since my friend was now working full time and I was a seasonal worker laid off for the winter and going home to be with his wife and kids till spring. We drove all day and stayed at the same well lit up area going home, since it was about a 15 hours drive from where we left with no issues. The next night it was getting late and we were looking for a place to pull over and crash in the truck for a few hours when this brand new white Ford Explorer turned on its flashers in front of us, then hit the brakes. As he came to a stop in the middle of the road, his car went fully black. The driver door opened and a guy who resembled the doctor in Jurassic Park or the Coronel from KFC stepped out, throwing his hands in the air. I rolled down the window and asked what was the matter. Said he bought this car a month ago and was on his way back from his daughter's and it keeps dying on him. As we're talking, the car lights up again. I said maybe a bad ground? Asked if he could use our phone cause he had no service, and I stupidly said I don't have any service either, and to be fair, looking at this old man frustrated and in need, I didn't think anything of it. He goes, "Oh, there it is, it's back," and jumped in and sped off. Northern Ontario on the Yellowhead Highway is pitch black and full of winds and turns, so now I'm thinking, great, this old man took off and I'm gonna come around a corner and slam into him, and that's what almost happened a few minutes later. I come around a bend and he is there on the road waving. Asks if I have jumper cables, which I did, but buried in the back under all of my stuff. The car lights up again and he asks if he'll follow him and make sure he gets to the next service center. He asked if he could ride with us, but all I have is the suicide doors with those lil back seats, and this guy again looked the Coronel. He took off again, and when I caught up we drove about 10 minutes when his car went black and he coasted to the edge, and before he came to a stop it turned back on again and he sped off around the bend. My wife is now pissed and wants me to abandon this old man, but we're literally in the middle of nowhere late and I've only seen a few cars the whole night we were driving. As I come around a bend I see his car pulled off and pointing down towards a house. He says out the window, "There is a house down here but no lights on, I want to see if they have a phone." Now looking back, yes, I should have just drove away, but I say alright and turn down the road with him. My wife pulls out her phone and sends a text to her sister, no service, of the make, model and plate number plus description of the guy, cause she is certain we are about to die. We get to the bottom and he gets out and says, should I go knock? It's now like 1:30 am and I say yeah, go knock, so he does. We are seating there pointing towards the hill to go up with the truck in drive when I hear a large chain dragging across the ground from behind us. I accelerate so fast I squealed the tires, making the old man fall down on the deck of the house as the house lights turn on and a younger man opened the door looking confused. My wife looked out the rear view and saw a husky on a chain as we left the road and rejoined the highway and sped off in the most fear I've ever felt in my life. She was so mad at me, lol. We drove for about an hour until I saw headlights coming towards us and a tow truck passed. I felt safer and sighed a sigh of relief. She still wouldn't let me pull over till we drove a couple more hours and found an actual truck stop that had several other passenger cars pulled over in it, lol. I guess the moral of the story is no matter how broke you are, always budget for a motel. I used to live in an incredibly isolated part of Australia which held about 150 or so locals spread out across huge mining fields. As kids we adventured everywhere and didn't care about getting lost. One day my friends and I took a shortcut through some scrub. We knew we were roughly heading direction for where we wanted to be. And there it was in all its glory. The glowing white porcelain of a toilet. Toilet roll included. It was just sitting out there, perfectly clean with a fresh toilet roll on the tree beside it. Even the ends were folded into a triangle. There was no poop in it and obviously it wasn't attached to plumbing. It was almost like some kind of weird art installation and no one believed us kids when we told them. There was nothing around us for a half an hour walk. No one lived close by as far as we knew. Of course we couldn't find it again, but I remember it clearly 15 years later. I live in such a rural area which is basically in the woods anyway. Driving back from the nearest town at night, I found 2 dead deer, mother and child, slumped on top of each other on the side of the lane. I got out with a torch to inspect. They were both dead but I couldn't see how. I pulled the child off the mother and lo and behold she was split wide open. I retreated and went home a bit weirded out. Just hit by a car. Didn't worry too much about it. Take the same route the next day. Someone had deflated the deer because they swole up, but the child was beheaded alongside the nearest left leg was torn completely off. Like someone had gone at it with a bloody samurai sword. Pretty weird. About 15 years ago, was exploring off trail through some dense, 10 to 12 feet high scrub in Southern California. Got turned around and decided to crawl on my hands and knees through a section that I thought might get me back on track when I found a black garbage bag half full of single, unpaired, kid-sized shoes. Was in a seriously remote and hard to reach, completely random place. It seemed weird, but the more I thought about it later, it felt like somebody went through a lot of trouble to hide these. Like some sort of serial killer's trophies that they decided was too risky to keep or even just throw in the trash. One time me and my boyfriend thought it would be fun to go on a trail in the woods at night. We started to freak ourselves out just because it was dark and we were scaredy cats, but on the way back to the trail we saw a man standing in the middle of the trail, a large asphalt trail, and it was like a scene from a horror movie. He just stood there and stared. We assumed he was some homeless guy who had taken too many drugs. He didn't move a muscle, just stared straight ahead. I was freaked out thinking he was going to come towards us. We just walked very slowly and as far away from him as possible until we passed his crazy ass. I kept looking back though, expecting him to move or something, but he just stood there. Equal parts creepy and sadistic. Going back a good 20 years-ish now, though. Walking through the woods of the village where I grew up, my friends and I came across a small segment of path that narrowed between several trees. In the opening, was a well-concealed length of rope covered in a mound of leaves, just slightly off the ground. It wrapped around the right-hand side tree, and went up into the branches above. It was holding up a large section of broken off tree trunk, then down to another thick stick staked in the ground. We kicked the stake and it resulted in the massive log swinging down at around head height, chest height on a fully grown adult I guess. Further down the path, we found a hastily dug hole in the dirt, which had been covered with thin twigs and loads of leaves, which we only found because the wind, I guess, had blown some of the leaves away. Inside the hole were loads of snapped, pointed sticks, pointing upright and stuck into the dirt. So yeah, could have been seriously injured twice that day.